This is Sarah Colata with Architecture Talk Tank. I have an exciting guest today, Arnaud Marthouret. Is that the right way I pronounce your name?
Arnaud Marthouret. You're almost there.
Almost there. Thank you so much, Arnaud, for joining me today on this talk. I have been following your writings online, on your blog, on your website, and I think you just have such an incredible way to look at architecture. And today I invited you to talk a little bit about the notion of times and how the industry and the economy is kind of evolving around COVID-19 and the changes that have come about. And also it would be great if you share a little bit more with our audience about who you are and what your studio is about. So I'll let you introduce yourself properly.
So as you said, my name is Arnaud Marthouret. I'm the founder and owner of Revelateur Studio. And although a lot of people know us as an architectural photography studio, which is what we started as, I do now more things that are generally related to communications for architects and designers. That includes photography, but it includes other things like strategic communications, media relations, and delving a little bit more into how to set up a business from a communications, marketing, and business development perspective as well. So someone was asking the question recently of how would you pitch what you do in one sentence or less, the well-known elevator pitch. And I gave it a little bit of thought and I said, well, we just take your craziest, wildest ideas and turn them into stories that your clients will want to read. And hopefully, as a result of reading those stories, they'll want to hire you.
Yeah, exactly. And speaking of stories, you are an incredible storyteller and writer. So tell me a little bit about how this all came about. What was the story behind that?
I think it's something that I've always had in me, but never really, until a few years ago, really took the time or the effort to put it out into the world. And when I transformed my business, that was starting in 2018, I think, or 2017. I forget, 2018, I think. I embarked on a program initially that was designed to help me reposition myself in the marketplace in a way that was unique and valuable to my clients. And what I did up until then, which was architectural photography, is a very valuable service to architects, but it's also a pretty commoditized service because from one architectural photographer to the next, you'll get a different style, you'll get a slightly different way of working, but at the end of the day, the product is very similar. And you see it in the photography you see in magazines and publications and things. And it's not to say that those photographers aren't extremely talented, because most of them are, but there's not a lot of ways to differentiate yourself in the marketplace. So me embarking on that program was really the catalyst for this whole change, which had started a year or two before, kind of in the back of my head. And this program was as much about positioning as it was how to actually do it, like to go through the steps to reposition yourself and start promoting your business and services in a different light. And writing was a part of it. And there was a requirement to write a certain amount every month. Which terrified me at the beginning because it's 3,000 words a month when you've never written anything with any regularity before, and I certainly hadn't written anything for the past 8 years since I left grad school, was a huge undertaking. But what I realized, if you do it long enough, it becomes a habit. And now I typically write more than what I'm supposed to or what I'm aiming to. But it took about a year to really become comfortable with it. So it's a bit of a long-winded way of answering your question. I don't know if I've answered everything, but I can clarify if you want me to.
No, you did. And actually, I thank you for going so much in depth into it, because I think that each of us on our journey have like things that we kind of always wanted to do, but maybe didn't really quite start at it. And it's nice to hear that, you know, it takes that perseverance and also time to develop a habit. And I know that you have posted several times the like to kind of in memory of that, how important it is to cross a day in the calendar when you write, so that you're actually consistent at it. And I think I'm going to borrow it for myself from you, because it actually visually is so pleasing when you like put a cross every day on your on calendar, and you feel like you're basically joining all these days in a big
Yeah. By all means, I put it out there for people to steal it. So it's actually not my idea. It comes from Jerry Seinfeld, who, when he was asked by young up and coming comedians what they should do to work on their craft, he said, it doesn't matter what you do, if how well you write, how clever what you write is. The only thing that matters is consistency. And he had this neat little trick, which you just referred to, of putting a calendar up on the wall and crossing each day every time you had written something, which after a while forms a chain of X's across the calendar. And the idea is to not break the chain. So if you go, you know, say 365 or 500 days, then it starts becoming a bit of a personal challenge. So it's a great way to motivate oneself and hold oneself accountable, because accountability for this kind of exercise, I think, is critical.
Yeah, absolutely. It is like it is with a lot of things that you want to achieve over a longer period of time. You know, I refer to things like that often as a marathon. You don't just run a sprint, but you kind of want to pace yourself. So it's nice also to set up like realistic goals for yourself, potentially write less, but every day it's easier to achieve the goal then. You know, and I think it's just, you know, coming from the perspective of how you look at architecture as well with communications. Why would it be important for architects to write?
A few reasons, but the main one is that, and that's just my opinion. I know some people will disagree, but there's also a lot of people who agree with me. Architecture is 40 years or maybe even 50 years behind the times in the way it promotes itself. Most architects still think of business development the way people did 40 or 50 years ago. Rely way too much, in my opinion, on word of mouth, which is still a very effective way of getting business, but I don't think it's sufficient anymore in such a crowded marketplace. And also, again, this might be a little controversial, but there's a lack of understanding of how to promote oneself, how to do business development, and how to make it very clear what the value of your offering is to your clients. I mean, I think you and I have talked about this before, but everyone and anyone in the architecture, marketing, and business development world says the same thing, is that architects are notoriously bad at telling or explaining what they do in terms that both make sense to their clients and are also appealing from the perspective of putting themselves in their clients' shoes and understanding what it is that their clients are looking. And so you go to most architecture firms' website and it's like, we're design driven and we care about materiality and we're collaborative, which are all empty sounding words that don't mean anything anymore because everybody uses them. And it's the rare firm, they're out there, but there's not that many that's going to talk about what they do in a way that's, one, more human intelligible, and two, speaks to their clients' potential pain points and what it is that those clients are hiring the architects to do. And that's one of the things that's missing the most. What was your question again? Because I think I had another kind of point I wanted to make.
Yeah, so I asked, why would it be important for architects to write?
Yeah, and so I had this conversation with a client, I think 2 days ago, and he told me, and he did it on his own, I didn't help him to do it. He told me, oh, I've hired a copywriter, and what we do is we're doing mini interviews. She's interviewing me about what I do, and then she turns that into blog posts that we're going to be able to post on our website to speak to our client base. And I asked him what the blog posts were about. And it's like, well, the first series we're going to do is on this project we're working on that hasn't started construction yet, but is a very I think, instrumental project in taking that firm to the next level, because it kind of checks a lot of the check boxes of what they want to do as a firm. And I said, we're going to release that as a series of stories so our clients can know what we're interested in, what we're up against, and how we navigate all those challenges in the design and construction process. So by the time we're done, they can read a series of, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 posts on the project and see what it takes to build a project of that quality and that complexity from A to Z. And I said, this is brilliant, because that's what I understand your clients will be looking for. If someone wants to hire you and they want to know that you have the experience and the ability and the communication skills to navigate through the approvals process, you have the ability to convince the city that what you want to do is different, but it's good for the city, the urban fabric. Those are great things to promote, because it's going to show you in a light that most architects are never seen in, and it's going to put you in a different category, and your clients will want to hire you based on that, I suspect. And so writing is instrumental because it puts your thoughts out there. And I know that for a lot of people it's scary, because it feels like you're naked in front of your audience, and in many ways you are, but that's also the quickest way to differentiate yourself from the competition. Because if your clients are looking at you and 2 or 3 other competitors on just what they can see alone, like your project pictures, maybe your project description, the type of projects you've done, there's going to be dozens, if not hundreds, of architects in your area that do the same thing. Whereas if they can get into your brain and understand how you think and how you're able to navigate challenges and overcome problems, I think that's a much more interesting thing to talk about. And it's also a great tool to sell your services to your clients.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that, the importance of actually kind of realizing what communications is, the power in it, really, it just can revolutionize completely the way that people do business in architecture. So this is why there is so much talk also in these channels. You talk a lot about this, and I do, because I feel like really mastering that aspect of storytelling and putting yourself out there is very much about differentiating yourself. So it's enormously important. And talking actually about kind of stepping into these times, there's so much changes happening right now with COVID and how the industry is kind of adapting to everything. So, I wanted to kind of ask you a little bit about this evolution that we're going through. And, you talk a little bit, like quite a lot about different like theoretical approaches to these aspects as well, the architecture and the practice. So, just wanted to ask you, like, what does looking at the process through the lens of evolution really mean? And why is it, in fact, important for architects?
I'm so glad you asked that question, because it's a personal hobby of mine to devour all the books I can put my hands on that deal with evolution, and especially how evolutionary theory relates to the way we interact and communicate as humans. And there's some great references out there. They're not very well known, but have been written by very, very smart people and make really interesting points. At the basic level, it's, if you understand evolutionary theory and how it applies to human-to-human relationships, there's a lot of kind of ways of being and communicating that we use as humans, and without necessarily even thinking about it, that influence the way we relate to one another. And I think understanding those is the key to good marketing at a basic level, because if you understand how humans react to certain messages, then you can craft your message accordingly. And so we go back to what I said earlier. If the description of what your firm does on your website is, we're passionate about design, which I hope you do because you're designers. So, if you asked a DJ if they're passionate about music and they said no, you probably should start to worry about them. That's kind of the obvious and low-hanging fruit. But if you say we care about materiality and sustainability and all those things, those are very technical things. And one of the most influential kind of lesson that I've learned comes from, he didn't invent it, but he packaged it in a way that was very easily intelligible, is Simon Sinek. And he has this famous quote that says, people don't buy what you do, they buy what you believe in. And that's the basis for his book, Start With Why. At a basic level, you know, you can talk about all the features of what you do, your sustainability, your ability to deliver under costs, under budget, and on time, and things like that, which are very important. But ultimately, that's not what influences people's decision. This is the arguments that people will use to post-rationalize their decision, but ultimately the buying decision is based on the emotional connection people have with what you're offering. And that, if we go back to the idea of like letting people into your mind and showing them how you think, that's exactly what this is doing, is to allow people to make an emotional connection with who you are or what you do, and then they can post-rationalize to death that they hired you because you had the cheapest price or the best value, whatever the case may be. And so if we go back to the looking at marketing and business development through the lens of evolution, that's really what that is. It's understanding at the deepest level possible how humans work from a psychological perspective and how they've evolved those psychological schemes to, it's not to take advantage of them, but it's to craft a message that will hit all the keys that make people make the decision to hire you or not. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely makes sense, and it's it's interesting to look at it that way as well. And just coming from it, I was wondering, like, what do you feel is like the biggest challenge for us that is in the future?
As it relates to COVID?
Yeah, and the aspect of basically kind of adapting to the different things that are coming our way right now, and how can we best really face those challenges, and as business owners, as architects.
Yeah. So COVID, I mean, as with any major crisis, is thrown a wrench into everything. But I think I wouldn't say unprecedented because it happened before, but it's been so long ago that we as a culture probably have forgotten what it means to go through a crisis like that. There's a few things. First of all, it's challenging for everyone. Those crises are incredibly stressful and challenging. And I think there's not a single one of us that hasn't faced some kind of challenge as a result of COVID. So it's important to put out there that we're kind of all in the same boat and we're all trying to figure out what to do next. Now, some of us have been challenged more than others, and there's people whose lives have been destroyed. They lost their homes, their jobs. That's horrible. And if that's the case, the first thing you want to take care of is the basics. Put a roof over your head, find another job. But for people that might be a bit more lucky, and I certainly count myself in that camp, the challenges haven't been so much of like, oh, where am I going to find the next job to put food on the table? But they've been more like, okay, business is dried up, so now I got to pivot and figure out what I'm going to do next. And that's where I think there's two main things that I want to stress in that regard. One is that if you're selling anything in this market as a result of COVID, the messaging has to change. And I didn't make that up. This comes from my friend Jeff Eccles, who's also a genius marketing person for the architecture industry. And he's written extensively about that because like I watched a fair amount of car stuff on YouTube because I'm a car guy. And if you watch car related videos on YouTube, you'll inevitably get car manufacturer ads. And a lot of the ads I've seen lately, especially from Volkswagen, so I'm going to call them out by name, they're pretty deaf to what everybody's going through, and it's pretty transparent that they're just trying to move cars. And even though their messaging has changed a little bit, it hasn't changed enough to reflect that they care about something more than just peddling cars to people who can afford them. And those ads annoy me to no end, because, first of all, because I'm not in the market to buy a car. I don't even have a car, and I'm a car guy, which is a bit ironic, but that's a different story. But it's like, enough already. Like, I know you're trying to sell cars, you're probably struggling just as everybody else is, but the message seems so tone deaf that it's a little frustrating. So the reason I'm saying this is because you cannot sell, and for the foreseeable future, until it's probably going to be for the next few years, you cannot sell what you do the way you did before the crisis, because everybody's hurting. So the messaging has to change, and it has to be, I think, more empathetic. It has to really focus on the immediate pain points, and not the long-term pain points that your clients may have. What is the number one problem that your potential clients are trying to solve? Which leads me to the other side of that coin. And crises are a tremendous time to find new opportunities to develop new businesses or new business ideas. So, for example, I have a lot of friends who are designers in the friends and clients who are designers in the residential market. And one thing that I've heard a lot is that because everybody's working from home, there's a huge amount of work that seems to be available for the taking for people who are not planning to go back to an office anytime soon and want to build or renovate a home, to maybe put a proper office in there, or separate a little bit the workspace between from the living space, so that their kids, who are also being schooled from home, aren't running around all day and preventing them from doing work and things like that. Conversely, I have also a lot of friends and clients who are working in the hospitality sector that is everything but dead. There's just no work in hospitality. Restaurants are struggling. Nobody's looking to design anything. But some opportunities that I've been told about by people in that space, and it seems like it's where everyone is going, is long-term care for seniors. Because I don't know how it is where you are, but there was a big problem with long-term care facilities at the beginning of COVID, and there were a lot of senior people who died because the way they're set up right now, they're basically an incubation chamber for the disease. And if one of them gets them, then everybody gets them, because they're all around each other all the time. So there's a need for better long-term care facilities. And on top of that, prior to COVID, it was already an issue. Like, how we care with or elderly was already beginning to be a problem. So that was exacerbated by the crisis. So everyone who's in hospitality, and those hospitality design skills seem to transfer quite well to long-term care facilities, is starting to move in that direction. So it's a time for opportunity, and try new ideas and put them out there and see if they stick. I personally have had dozens of half-baked business ideas since the crisis started, a few of which made it past the mere thinking phase. And there's one or two that have become services that I'm trying to promote now. One of which is to coach medium-sized design and architecture firm with their communications. So to help them put the systems in place to build a long-term communication strategy that's going to help them craft a message. We go back to the idea of the different message that needs to be put out, and then relentlessly promote that message to the world. And I'm putting an emphasis on what I call the unloved media in the architecture world, because everybody wants to get published in magazines. There's tons of blogs that are more than willing to publish your projects out there. So everybody's going after those opportunities. But I think there's tremendous things to be done with video. As much as we've heard for the last few years that video is the next medium, still too few people use it. Podcasts, this conversation is case in point. And there are a few other things that I'm exploring as well, like non-conventional ways of promoting a business that I think can have tremendous impact if they're done well. But the message of what I'm saying is really to be creative, like find new ways to promote your new and crazy ideas, and some of them won't work, some of them will, but the more you try, the more you're likely to hit on something that will resonate with the marketplace, provides the value to your clients that they're looking for without sounding like you're just trying to peddle something. At the end of the day, we all have to make a living. We all have to sell ourselves. But there's the kind of yucky old school way of selling yourself and being pushy and salesy, or tone deaf. And there's the smart way, which is thinking about what your clients are looking for and try to speak to that desire.
Absolutely, yeah. And something interesting that you mentioned about specifically with the ad related to the cars. You often talk about conscious capitalism, and I wanted to ask you about that. Is this how you would define it? That conscious capitalism is about communicating more empathetically and actually addressing your message directly to your audience and their needs, and really understanding their desires and pain points that they're going through. Not necessarily just trying to shuffle the products in front of them despite the circumstances. Is this how you would define in practical terms or in practical situation what conscious capitalism is?
Yeah, that's part of it, but that's not all of it. Conscious Capitalism is actually a book by that name that was written by John McKee, and that's probably close to 10 years old now, so it's nothing really new. And I read this book years ago, which was really an epiphany to me, because I've always considered myself to be a capitalist, but not in the sense of it's all about making money and nothing else. I've always had this kind of moralistic fiber to my own character. And when I read that book, it's as if I had found something that put what I felt was true in words. And conscious capitalism, at the essence of it is that businesses are a tremendous force for positive change, but that requires that they operate under a certain set of principles of conditions. And so what John McKee talks about in the book, and I'm grossly paraphrasing because I haven't read that book in years, so I'm just talking from what I remember, but he puts the emphasis on taking care of all types of stakeholders for a business. So it's not just shareholders, they're one type of stakeholders, but your employees are the second type of stakeholders, and then your clients or customers. And so John McKee, who's the founder of Whole Foods, who's now owned by Amazon, ironically, always had, I wouldn't say always, because when he started out, he didn't have that philosophy fully fleshed out, but very early on, realized that if he focused on the well-being of his all three stakeholders, the shareholders, the employees, and the customers, his business would be more successful. And I think what put him on that path was that early on, I think his first store burnt down or was flooded, was completely destroyed, and he was going to go out of business. But because he was a staple of the community as a food store and people didn't want him to go away, the community came together and helped him rebuild. Maybe they donated some money. I forget what the exact details were. And that's when he realized that all the stakeholders were critical to the success of his business, because if he didn't take care of them, they wouldn't take care of him in return. And so the whole philosophy of Whole Foods was to always take really good care of their employees. They always paid them more than the competition. They always treated customers extremely well, and all those things. And that's really what conscious capitalism is. I don't think capitalism is a bad thing in itself, because we hear that a lot in the media. It's like, oh, we need to do away with capitalism, and we need to go back to maybe, or develop a different kind of system. I think the world we live in right now is not capitalism as I envision it or as I think of it, because without getting into politics, a lot of what we see now is what I would call crony capitalism. So it's capitalism in bed with, for lack of a better word, governments, and then there's all kinds of abuses that happen because, you know, in the States we hear a lot about lobbying and getting politicians in your pocket by donating them money and things like that. I think if you remove that kind of layer of corporations getting in bed with government officials, you would have a lot fewer problems. Without being naive and saying, oh, capitalism needs to be this utopia. At the end of the day, capitalism is just people trading with each other. And we know that's undeniable through history that trade is the most effective force for peace. When people trade with one another, they don't fight. You see it with the construction of the European Union, and I'm sure you're very well aware of that, given your background, that as many problems as the European Union has, it's also been a tremendous force for good because it's established a trade network between people that historically were at war for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And there hasn't been a single conflict in Europe since World War II, which is probably one of the longest time without a conflict that there ever was in that region. And you see it at the global level, like most countries trade with one another, and there's, frankly, I think very little threat of a global war because there's too much at stake, right? There's local conflicts and those are really sad, but I don't think we've seen it. We haven't seen anything like any of the world wars in a long time. And I always worry that when countries try to kind of close in on themselves and cut themselves from the rest of the world, like we've seen in some of the Western countries like the US, maybe the UK to a certain extent, and a few other countries, that's when problems may arise in the long term because trade suffers, and trade as a force for good then can't do what it does, which is to keep people at peace with each other. So this is a bit of a super long-winded answer on what conscious capitalism is. But I think at the basic level, it's about being a good person and treating others like you would want to be treated. And that includes not just clients or shareholders, but also employees, because without your employees, your business doesn't exist. And so understanding that, you know, all those relationships between all the different kinds of stakeholders are critical, and that the more you work at making those positive and effective and seamless, the more your business is going to thrive. And there's many examples of businesses that have done things like Whole Foods out there, but they're still a minority. And it's kind of baffling to me that those are not emulating more businesses to do the same thing, because it just works. Like, the proof is in the pudding. All those businesses that have gone through those kinds of transformations and have put people before profit, really. It doesn't mean you shouldn't work at being profitable, because that's the kind of the basic rule of any business. You have to be profitable if you want to stay in business, but it's not the only and the end goal. I think if you take care of your people and you put the emphasis on people and prioritize their well-being, you can see also tremendous changes in the irony that businesses like Whole Foods, Zappos. I interviewed a guy who works locally, has a business who's called Roman Moldings in Toronto. They've all gone through that kind of transformation. And what they say is not only from a relationship perspective, their businesses are thriving, but they're also more profitable than they were before their transformation. So to me, it's a no-brainer. Every business should thrive towards that. But the change is what scares people the most. The change won't happen overnight. It might be painful, but I can guarantee that if that transformation is done well and taken to its logical conclusion, it can only lead to good outcomes. And it's kind of amazing that we don't see more of that. But that's a different story.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it's so very important to remember that at the end of the day, everything in business is really just between people. And so the person on the other side is also a human being. So being able to actually like really feel into the shoes of your client can be a game changer. And I think it's a very important message to put across. So in all of this, it seems to me like it's very important to take risks and really try to kind of reinvent the way in which you communicate and actually approach your client. So, you know, I think it's kind of the message that you are moving forward as well, is for people to actually take those risks and yeah, indeed try to adapt and to maintain that agility through a situation like this.
Yeah, and there's no better time than now to take a risk, because there's a whole bunch of new opportunities that have popped up as a result of the COVID crisis, because there's a whole set of new needs that haven't been fulfilled because it just happened. So now's the best time to take a risk, get into a new market before everybody else, try it out. And if it works, you might be very successful. If it doesn't, as much as I'm not a big fan of the tech Silicon Valley culture, there's one thing they've always gotten right, is the idea of iterating very quickly and trying new ideas fast, and then moving on as soon as they realize that that new idea doesn't work, because that's how you're going to hit gold eventually. And that's the way creativity works too. If you're an artist, you're going to do hundreds and hundreds of sketches before you paint the painting that everyone will want to buy. You know, Picasso's most famous paintings probably resulted of hundreds, if not thousands of hours painting, but also probably dozens of mock-ups and sketches and things. And it's like, it's not like he put a canvas on the stand and started painting and that painting appeared. It resulted from a lot of work. And it's the same thing with business ideas. You have to put in a lot of work without knowing whether you're going to be rewarded for it. But the more you do it, the more likely you are to be rewarded for it. So that's the whole idea behind taking risks. I live in a country where people are generally risk averse, and that Canada, that is, and that actually drives me up the wall, because I've always been probably a bit more of a risk taker than the average person. And it's frustrating to be to live in a culture where when you suggest new ideas, most people will reject them because there's some kind of fear, like unexplained and intangible fear of what those things would be, even if the actual risk of that idea not working is very minimal. But it's very important, and I think that's the key to every successful entrepreneur. Is like, we always hear this kind of overtold stories of how many times Steve Jobs failed before he hit gold and those kinds of things. But there's a huge nugget of truth to that, right? Elon Musk has probably failed more times than anyone else in the world. You just don't hear about all the failures. But and frankly, Tesla has almost gone bankrupt many times, and he kind of saved it at the last minute. But he did so because he was able to take risks and literally, in his case, put his entire fortune in the balance, which paid off. But it's a huge gamble, right? The other side of the coin of taking risks is what was I gonna say? Sorry, I lost my train of thought. So it'll come back to me later.
It's okay, no worries. Anyway, I can cut it out, so don't worry about the technical aspect of it. I always edit through these, but I wanted to like slowly wrap up. So guys, if you are interested in getting a communication strategy written up for you and an advice on your communication strategies, I really encourage you to reach out to Arnauld. You know, it's really So very important at this level to get clarity on those pain points of your clients and take that step forward in respect of risks as well, and actually position yourself as like an innovative, potentially solution on the market today, because there is new opportunities. And I think that there isn't any better time to look into your communication strategy, into your branding, into the way you market yourself, and position yourself there as literally just the solution that some of the people are looking for today. And with that, obviously, kind of pivot your business and into potentially a whole new opportunity that can evolve for you down the line. So, Arnaud, tell us, where do people find you if they wanted to get in touch with you? I know you offer like free call sessions and things like that. So how do people come across it?
Yeah. So I'm not a big social media person. The only platform I'm on is LinkedIn, so you can find me on there. But the best place to go is probably my website, because everything's centralized there. It's www.rvltr.studio. It's rvltr.studio. There's no .ca or .com. The .studio is the domain name. There is, if you go there, you will be prompted to sign up for a newsletter. I highly recommend that, because that's where everything I put out is released, all my writings, my podcasts, everything else. So that's the best way to keep in touch. As far as the free consultation calls are concerned, there's a link that I can send you. I'll share it with you. But you can also go to calendly.com. So it's calendly.com/rvltr-studio/30M 30-minute 30M-Zoom. But if I send you the link, you can probably
I will put it under the video.
So look in the description of the video for the link to book a consultation, and I'd be more than happy to have a chat with whoever wants to talk about their communication strategy. And I still do architectural photography too. You'll see the picture in my background when you look at the video. This picture here is one of my latest crimes. So you can, I'm always happy to photograph buildings too, because that's very fun. And yeah, I'll be happy to talk to anyone who wants to connect and tell their story.
Excellent. Well, thank you so very much for your time and your expertise, and very interesting, discourse on the topic of evolution of the business and decision making as well in times of crisis.
Yeah, you're very welcome.
Yeah, it was lovely hosting you, and I wish you all the best, guys. When you want to connect with Arnaud, the links are below this video, and subscribe to my channel as well. And thank you so much for watching, everybody. Thank you, Arnaud.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks.